Hi, and welcome back to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm your host, Steve Smith, aka Art Dallas. This is episode 66 with Carl Franklin. Meeting him here at NDC London. Hey, Carl, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Steve?
Good. So you have a tip for us related to Blazor, which you've been doing a lot of work on lately. Is that right?
Yeah, I have been doing a lot of work on Blazor. I dove into this thing head first, and server-side first, and then WebAssembly, Blazor more recently.
Right, and that's shipping in a couple months, right? May, I hear?
May, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it's pretty good right now. I was in the Steve Sanderson's 2-day workshop with Ryan Nowak, the guys that wrote it, right?
Right.
And I'm actually delivering that workshop in Porto, in NDC Porto.
Nice.
So I really wanted to attend it first.
Sure.
Yeah. But I learned a lot even then. But back in October, I started this project, and it led into a webinar that I've been doing online.
Right. I heard that's been going well.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But in this project, I needed a generic component. So if you don't know what the Blazor component model is, it's really cool. You can make components that combine markup and code and even JavaScript if there's interop that needs to happen there.
Sure.
And, compile that to an assembly. And then just, it's just like the old ActiveX days. You can just drag that into your, refer to it in your project, and you've got it.
Sure. And if you're a .NET developer, it's great because you're working with HTML, which if you've been a web developer for a while, and then you're also just using Razor syntax and C#, right?
Exactly. And so it's actually a lot more like Windows Forms programming than it is web programming. I mean, you're using C#, right? If you don't, the only times I ever have to hit JavaScript is when there's something that isn't yet implemented that, they haven't yet done, but they will.
So real briefly, tell me, or for the audience, what's the difference between server-side Blazor and client-side Blazor?
Yeah, very different. Server-side Blazor is all the code running on the server and being the UI being shipped down over a Signal R connection. So it's a WebSocket connection. It's not like a REST connection, which comes and goes.
Right.
It's a persistent connection. And so rather than your client making requests through REST APIs and then getting whatever, data it needs, and then the JavaScript on the client updating the client, what happens is
like a typical SPA would
like a SPA would do. What happens is you establish this circuit, they call it, which is, the persistent connection that goes back and forth between you and the server. When you click a button, let's say, the interaction is intercepted by Blazor, and over that Signal R connection of the whatever is, there's a protocol basically that gets, so the server knows that that button has been clicked. The server also has a sort of a map of the DOM in memory, per client.
Right.
The overhead's about 85K per client.
Right.
And that's just in Blazor. So then it, it executes whatever code it needs to execute, does a diff of the model of the DOM on the server, and whatever's changed, it ships those in the form of messages back over that Signal R connection to the client, which then updates the client.
So it doesn't have to do a whole page refresh or a whole page DOM reload. It's just, taking the elements that changed and updating.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's very efficient, actually, because of this, the way that everything works.
But the real excitement seems to be around the WebAssembly story coming in May, right?
Yes. The WebAssembly story is a little bit different. It's the code runs on the client, in the browser, and it's being interpreted by Blazor and then turned into WebAssembly code, bytecode, whatever that is. And so it's a little bit different. Currently, right now, and we're talking, January 29th, 2020, which is when we're recording this, there isn't any debugging in Visual Studio of that client code. You can connect to a process, but you have to start without debugging and then enable it and hook it into the browser.
Right.
So you can, hit breakpoints and all that stuff in the browser tools.
Okay.
So it's a little wonky right now, but it's still very, very powerful. The difference, of course, let's talk about accessing data. On the server side, you can just call your EF context, whatever it is, because you're on the server.
Right.
If you're on the client, though, now you have to either use a web API, build your own REST endpoints, whatever that is. You could use GRP.
Whatever connection you are making on whatever port to your database, you probably can't do that over the internet.
Definitely.
We would hope. Right?
We don't want you to do that.
Right.
Yeah. You could use gRPC as well. And Steve Sanderson has a really cool blog post about using gRPC with Blazor. There's a .NET wrapper for protobuf. It's pretty cool, actually. But so this component that I want to talk about, first of all, the blog post is at objectpicker.appvnext.com.
All right. So it is an object picker, and it's at appvnext.com.
That's right. AppVnext is my consulting company, right?
Sure.
Okay. So the object picker implements that common UI pattern that you've seen on many websites and in many apps, where you have two lists next to each other and some buttons in between them. And on the list on the left, you have all of the items that you could possibly select.
Right.
And the list on the right are those that you have selected.
Sure.
And so the four buttons are, move the selected item on the left to the one on the right.
Right.
Right. Move all of them to the one on the right.
And then vice versa.
And then vice versa.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a very typical UI thing, right? Mm-hmm. Where, when you move, you can only be in one place, either the list of all or the list of selected. So it is truly a moving.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. So the problem is, of course, I wanted a component that I could reuse, and I have different data types that in different parts of my application.
Okay.
So,
but the rendering of this is typically just going to be a string, right? In the list. Like your data type, you have to specify a property of it that would be bound? Okay.
Yeah, that's it. And so there's this thing called a type param in Blazor. And you just, say at type param and then whatever you want to call it, T item, whatever it is. And then you have these parameter properties, which is what you use in Blazor to expose properties. You call it, you put a parameter attribute on them. And so I have one string for the item type, right? And that is really just for display purposes.
Right.
And then I have the item type plural also for display purposes. Like, in the case of the one I show is instruments, right?
Okay.
So item type would be instrument, item type plural would be instruments. Then you have the text property name, which would be
what each item will be displayed as.
Yeah, so name is in my case. And then the value property name, which is the primary key, how you identify that. And then you pass in a list of all the items and a separate list of selected items. And those are defined as list of T or T item, whatever you call that type param. And then you have event callbacks and there's an event callback called component updated.
Okay.
Which is really a really cool way to do sort of iNotify property changed. Mm-hmm. You anytime that we modify anything that's in these lists, we do a callback, and in the receiving code, in the host code, you can do what's essentially a refresh.
Sure.
It's called state has changed.
Right.
So and then in terms of the markup, it's just a table. Right. So the table on the left has the list of items, all items, and the table and then another column for all the buttons, and then the table on the right has the selected items. And so then there's and that's basically it. And it's not a whole lot of code, and it's a completely reusable drop-in. And this isn't even an assembly. This is just a Razor file.
Right.
You could just take this Razor file, drop it in your project, and it'll just work.
And if you go out to that URL,
yeah,
object picker,
objectpicker.appvnext.com. You can download the sample project and
awesome. And that'll get you started, and then you can come up with all kinds of ideas for ways that you can make your own custom controls and components.
Exactly.
In your own Blazor apps.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, that sounds like a good tip.
Thanks.
So it was good seeing you again, Carl. What other things are you working on these days? Anything you want to share?
Yeah. Speaking of Blazor, I'm doing this crazy Blazor Roadshow.
All right.
It's actually called Carl Franklin's Blazor Roadshow.
You should add crazy in that name.
Absolutely. And DevExpress is sponsoring it. We're going to 21 stops in the U.S. starting February 10th, ending March 24th. And then after that, there's going to be 57 other stops in Europe, Canada, Australia, wherever else we can find that will have us.
Nice.
It's going to be nuts. I'm going to be gone all year. And of course, I'm also doing this live one-day workshop online.
Yeah.
And you can go to blazor.appvnext.com to sign up for that. And if you can't make it to one of those, you can download the materials in the video.
Cool.
From previous show.
Whether you can get there live or after the fact, you can get access to some of this training.
Yep.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Carl.
Thank you, Steve.
That's it for this week. If you want to hear more from me, go to rdallas.com/tips and sign up for a free tip in your inbox every Wednesday. Thanks for subscribing to Weekly Dev Tips. I'll see you next week with another great developer tip.